There we go. Welcome back to Talking Thursdays. Today I'm joined by Olivia Fialkow, an independent creative director based out of New York. Not only is she a wonderful human being, she's one of the most stylish people I know. We are going to be hearing from Olivia, speaking a little bit about her journey, the work that she's done to date, and then at the end of this, we'll hopefully have a little conversation between us and learn a little bit more. So, Olivia, over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, James. It's really an honor and very exciting to be here today. So thank you so much for inviting me to chat. I'm Olivia. I'm an independent creative director based in New York. And if you've worked with me, you also probably know my dog, Amaro, who James has met, and he comes with me to set and to all of my jobs. And he's probably the best creative collaborator that I've ever worked with. My career as a creative starts actually quite young. I grew up in Massachusetts. I had this very kind of like typical American childhood, grew up around nature. Both my parents were creatives and filmmakers, but I felt very far removed from the world that I work in right now. I felt like, growing up in Boston, it's a beautiful, beautiful city, but I wasn't really surrounded by art, culture, and design the way that I am now in New York. My childhood was really about animals and nature and feeling grounded and really learning how to care for other creatures and for the earth, which was incredibly formative for me. But kind of a fun fact is I did grow up around film, and my mom is a producer, and I have one tiny little IMDb credit as myself on the New Yankee Workshop, which was a very early show on public television. So it's my first sort of foray into production. And it's a kind of a fun fact about my early days on set, very early, because that was 1994. But I really began my creative career, if you can even call it that, when my family got their first computer. And like most kids, we had a big Windows 95 computer that lived in our living room, and we had dial-up internet. And instead of hanging out and playing with Neopets like a normal kid, I became completely obsessed with eBay. My dad had bought a car part on eBay, and I was sort of fascinated by this like online network of people connecting and chatting, and kind of like the early kind of the days of commerce on the internet. And unbeknownst to my family, I began to buy vintage dead stock sunglasses in bulk and resell them for about 3 or 5 times the price on eBay. And so as a small child, I was like learning these skills that eventually eventually parlayed into my career, but at the time just sort of felt like fun and really like Monopoly money, honestly. But I was learning copywriting, I was learning customer service, I was learning marketing, I was learning photography. And all this was happening kind of in secret until my parents got a letter from the IRS saying that I owed taxes because I had sold thousands of dollars of sunglasses online. And in retrospect, it's kind of weird. I was just like this 10-year-old kid talking to all these strangers on the internet who had no idea that they were talking to a child. But, this it's a funny story, but it's sort of my first introduction to the way that art and commerce intersect. And, like any good brand build.
The idea of receiving a letter from the IRS, like, what glasses did you say you were selling?
I had found, I'm sure this is the case today on eBay, but you could buy like a lot, meaning 50 or 100 dead stock items. So you could buy like baseball hats or sunglasses or, baseball cards or whatever. And I had found a couple people who had all these dead stock 1980s sunglasses. So I'd buy like 50 at a time for like $40. And I will also caveat that I was using my dad's eBay account. So this is sort of like pre-online banking. So it took him a little while to figure out what I was doing on his eBay account under his name. So I would buy these sunglasses. They would arrive to the post office. I'd go to the post office, pick them up, bring them home, and then I would individually photograph and list each individual item. And then, in so doing, I was also learning a little bit about sales and marketing, and I had a shitty little digital camera that I'd use to photograph the sunglasses. And I wish I had, I'm sure somewhere on some hard drive I have photographs of like how I marketed them. And I'm sure the photos were very blurry. And I definitely was not photographing them on myself because I was a child. But, as any great brand builder knows, you need a website in order to expand your business. And so after spending a little bit of time on eBay and building my building the early years of my business on their platform, I realized I needed my own. And so, like any great netizen in the late 90s, I found my way to GeoCities. And I built a very simple website. But again, like these skills that I now realize are so important to how I work as a creative today, I was just using them because I was like playing and exploring, and like the stakes were quite low and I didn't even realize what I was doing. I was learning how to write, I was learning how to code, basic HTML. I also began to use early Photoshop to begin to design these like probably pretty janky assets to then upload on eBay and have on my website. This is obviously all pre-IRS letter, before my family knew what I was doing and became terrified that I was talking to strangers on the internet. But all of these skills eventually transposed into teaching me design, teaching me the importance of communication, visual communication. And it was sort of the first foray too into understanding brand strategy, figuring out what your story is, figuring out your market positioning, figuring out what the X factor is that sets you apart. And again, this is like super early on the internet. There was like, the internet felt very small. There was not like a big community of people doing these things. So I definitely didn't know any other kids who were doing what I was doing. I sort of felt like a bit nerdy, like a bit weird. So I definitely didn't talk about it. Not a ballet or a soccer practice or anything like that. But in hanging out on the internet, I also began to find these online communities of people who were talking about culture and art and design. And because eBay was this marketplace for things, I began to discover like design objects and like artworks. And then I found my way over to Blogger and was reading blogs. And I found this kind of like amazing, robust community of people who were talking about all these things that I couldn't really relate to because I grew up in kind of a suburban rural area outside of Boston. We didn't have a lot of the things I was seeing on the internet, but I was so fascinated by fashion and music and these things that were happening on a global scale. And not only was I digesting it and reading it on blogs, I was also beginning to write my own blog, which again, I wish I still had this online because I'm sure it's pretty cringe, but at the time, I didn't even realize I was embracing cringe. It was just like a way to communicate and connect with other people who were also interested in the things that I was interested in. And that's like youth culture and music and luxury fashion and these things that felt so far removed from the world where I grew up. But, ultimately kind of led to this like, these sort of like creative impulses. I wanted to emulate what I was seeing online. And then as the internet continued to evolve, I moved off of Blogger, I moved on to Tumblr. I actually found this email, I guess from a couple of years ago, but my Tumblr, I guess, would be 16 today, which is kind of amazing. And on Tumblr, I began to sort of hone these skills of pulling references, making mood boards, creating these visual worlds to communicate bigger ideas. And it was a time on the internet where things felt very small, very intimate. You began to know a lot of people. And as I began to connect with more and more people on Tumblr and on Blogger, I kind of began to grow like a little bit of a following. And again, like sort of like my experience on eBay, nobody knew I was a child on the internet, because when you're curating these worlds or offering these services and kind of creating these visual experiences, nobody really knows who you are behind a screen. And so again, I was continuing to hone the skills that eventually lead to my career, which were like writing, and my skills as a designer had obviously improved quite a bit since I was marketing sunglasses on eBay. And all of this turned into a fashion Tumblr where I amassed like quite a significant following, which felt wild to me because I was going to school every day. I had this very normal life. I wasn't buying designer clothes, but I was curating these worlds and these mood boards and pulling these references that felt very far beyond like the way I express myself in my day-to-day life, but I just begun to hone and sharpen my taste. And I had this really cool experience when I was a senior in high school where I was actually invited to attend New York Fashion Week. And it was my first time being in New York alone. I'd gone with my family as a child, but had never spent time like in New York, not doing touristy things. And it was my first time realizing, or it really crystallized for me in that moment, that like, if you pursue a creative career, there's opportunities for you far beyond sort of the day-to-day, the mundane, the things that are familiar to you. You can create a world that's entirely your own, and you have access to things that are sort of very far beyond maybe where you were brought up or the experiences you had as a child. And it was incredibly cool to be invited to attend Fashion Week and go to these events. It was sort of early in the days of blogging when it all felt very new, and the idea of inviting a teenager to a fashion show wasn't such a commonplace thing. And it was this moment where I realized that like, not only had I sort of sharpened my taste as this kid hanging out on the internet, like a lot of us were, I also had begun to build a career for myself that was something that I could actually parlay into something that went beyond just selling sunglasses here and there. There was like an actual sort of career opportunity, a trajectory, or road that I could follow. And so when I entered university, I went to Brown in Providence. I didn't really know what I wanted to study. I had these self-taught skills as a designer. I was a pretty good writer. I loved art. And I was incredibly fortunate to attend a university where we didn't have a core curriculum. We weren't required to take certain courses. We could explore several different routes wherever our kind of creative impulses led us. We could follow that thread. I took a ton of classes at RISD. I was moving between the art school and the liberal arts school. And I met the most incredible people who were from all over the world, people who kind of had like lived the experiences in a way that I was like pulling references around as a child, hanging out online. And it was incredibly eye-opening and incredibly powerful. And having the opportunity to study at a university like that really opened my eyes, not only to the world, but to the possibilities of like taking all of these skills that I had amassed sort of, like here and there, and sort of created this like weird hodgepodge, like this like magpie pile of design skills and writing skills and communication skills, and realizing like in taking these courses and meeting people from all over the world, I could actually maybe parlay them in something that looked like a career, a creative career. And being in Providence and meeting alums and working with professors led me to the opportunity to begin interning in New York in the summer, in between my freshman and sophomore year, and then subsequent summers after that at school. And again, like I kind of keep coming back to New York, and I was invited to go to New York Fashion Week as a teenager as my first opportunity to sort of be immersed in this world that I've been referencing and have been living in online. And then like to be part of it and to feel included was honestly incredibly life-changing. And then being able to work in that world and being able to intern in New York, and obviously, when you're an intern, you're the lowest dog on a totem pole, but you're just a fly on the wall in these rooms that you could only ever dream of being in when you're younger. And my first internship was at a newspaper. I hope that you don't Google me, but if you do, I have some pretty embarrassing bylines that I wrote as an intern. I was the nightlife intern, and I worked for the nightlife editor. So I kind of got dragged along to some funny events and had some crazy experiences working with him. And he ended up being an amazing mentor to me. And he's someone who I've actually continued to stay in touch with here and there throughout my career. But in working with him, I realized that like, as a writer and as someone who cares about telling stories, you don't just need to be a journalist. You can also be a different kind of writer. And that led me to spending a couple of years interning as a copywriter. My last internship was at a company called Warby Parker, which at the time was very, very small. It was, I think, less than 50 people when I was a summer intern there heading into my senior year. But obviously now it's a global brand. But when I was there, I really felt like we were building something from the ground up, and it was very young, very startup-y, and very scrappy. And it was this time when these very disruptive internet brands were beginning to take hold, and Warby was sort of, in a way, like leading the charge, or it was like sort of like the tip of the spear of this like movement of direct-to-consumer brands. And at Warby, I worked with this amazing woman named Molly Young. Some members of your audience might be familiar with her as a writer. She writes for, New York Magazine, The New Yorker, New York Times. She's a brilliant writer. And she's only a couple years older than me, but she was an amazing mentor. She had gone to Brown as well. I'd met her through the Alum Network. she really took me under her wing. And it was the first time, honestly, like I began to see how my education at university and then everything that came before that could actually sort of solidify into a title and a career at a company in a way where I was like, oh, I understand that there is like a next step here. I'm not sort of just like collecting like a magpie, these like random skills and random threads. It's beginning to crystallize into a real opportunity. And through working with Molly at Warby, she very generously introduced me to my first bosses, which were Andy Spade and Anthony Sperduti at Partners in Spade. And I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to work there right after graduation. Like I graduated, pretty much got in the car, I drove to New York the next day, moved into a shitty little apartment in East Village with 4 other people, and began working with Andy and Anthony. At the time, Partners in Spade was this revolutionary small creative shop that worked with some of the biggest consumer brands at the time. Andy and Anthony had both been at Wyden. They're sort of these legends of the advertising world. They were also amazing bosses and mentors. It was a very small team. We all worked very closely together. I obviously had my ass handed to me. I was the youngest person on the team, and it was an incredibly formative experience. But I just feel so fortunate to have had the opportunity to work underneath the two of them. And Anthony and I have stayed close over the years, and he's been incredibly supportive and just like really an amazing mentor figure. So I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to meet him when I was so young. And I realized, so advice I'd give to your audience, I've realized that every single opportunity that I've had is because somebody took a chance on me. I was this kid graduating college, and Partners in Spade was hiring a junior copywriter at the time, and I didn't really have a lot of experience. I just, was about to leave school, and they took this chance on me. And even to this day, having Partners in Spade on my resume has been an amazing calling card. And the skills I acquired while working there, and the people that I met, and the lessons that I learned, all of this has continued to follow me throughout my career, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity. And while at Partners in Spade, I really began to understand the power of brand. And prior to starting at the studio, I understood that people designed brands and that there were logos and that there were colors and packaging. Like these are all things that existed in the world, but I didn't think twice about how those came together. And working under Andy and Anthony, I began to learn the power of brand, the power of storytelling and strategy, and that brands are these characters, they're these friends, these familiar faces. And studios like Partners in Spade, like you're writing those characters. It's like you're developing a character that exists in the world, and it's something and becomes someone that like lives alongside you and becomes part of the fabric of your daily life. And it was sort of this first opportunity where I really understood like what it means to tell a brand story and what it means to build something from the ground up. And like obviously in this case, it was visual identities and brand worlds, but there's so much more that we were tapping into. And given Andy and Anthony's background in advertising, we did these kind of we had these like really fun projects that we take on as a studio, where we did things like the world's tiniest parade for Warby, these stunts that were part of the world building exercise, but went beyond just brand building. It was about sort of taking the fabric of what they'd already built and continuing to expand it and explode it and bring it into the world in fresh and different ways. So my first job was there, and I really owe the team at Partners in Spade everything. It really laid the groundwork for everything that I do today and everything that I am as a professional. Simultaneously, I was always, I guess you really can't teach an old dog new tricks. I was always sort of working on personal projects on the side, and I think that they were aware that I had like a couple freelance things and side projects, and they were very supportive. Or they kind of like let me do my thing, which is really important, because in addition to the work I was doing at the studio, I was continuing to hone other skills, including it's kind of a crazy image, but I had the opportunity, for example, to put on a play as like the last play at the Hotel Chelsea before it was renovated and turned into the contemporary version of the hotel. So these like side projects where I knew nothing about theater production, but friends approached me and I had the opportunity just to kind of dive in and again, sort of like learn by doing and, immerse myself in a new world and try something out and try and fail and make a couple mistakes. And ultimately we pulled off something really successful and really fun. And I learned a lot along the way. But it was important to also have these side projects that continue to develop and sharpen my taste and my skills as a creative. And then after Partners in Spade, I left and began freelancing pretty much freelanced ever since. But one of the agencies that I worked for as a contractor right after I left PNS, it's called Matt Projects. And it's a young agency. The founders are not much older than I am, but the experience I had there is one of the most formative of my creative career. And there I understood the power of culture. And it's sort of manifold. Like, it was a scrappy young agency. We were very focused at the time around event production and live event capture, like fashion show capture, music and concerts. But it was there that I met my husband. I met some of my best friends, and culture and community were sort of so core to the experience of not only working at Matt, but also like what we were building as a team. And in many ways, while I owe Partners in Spade so much professionally, I owe Matt like kind of my whole New York life socially, in addition to the professional experiences I had while working there. It was a very different work environment. It was extremely fly by your pants, very like sex, drugs, rock and roll in the best way, but also kind of wild. You were working with your best friends. You're also partying with your friends and your colleagues and traveling to crazy places all over the world to shoot music events and fashion shows and working on all these branding projects. But it was beautiful and exciting, and it felt very of that moment in New York. A fun fact that while I was there, I had the opportunity to work on the initial branding and go-to-market strategy for Fire Festival, which I think taught me the power of storytelling, and it also taught me the negative power of storytelling and what can happen when things go horribly wrong, and what happens when collectively a team does not listen to their instincts about a client or a project not feeling right from the jump. But it was an incredibly formative experience working on Fire, and something that I learned a lot from. And I hope to not repeat a lot of the same mistakes that we learned as a team working on Fire, but I certainly learned a lot. And it's a fun fact to say that was something that we worked on together. And after I left Matt, I started a studio with my husband and, well, then boyfriend, now husband. And we kind of jumped into it together. He had been a director and an editor at Matt, so he came from this film background. I had this background, this sort of nascent background in branding. And we just began working together. We didn't really have the plan to start a full studio, but we began collaborating on a couple projects here and there. And it blossomed into something much bigger than I think either of us anticipated. And the power of partnership was something that really guided us. We obviously were in a romantic relationship, but then also had this amazing creative collaboration between the two of us. And it was both wild and also kind of reckless, but also really beautiful. And together we had the opportunity to work on some very big clients sort of out of the gate. And again, I kind of go back to this idea that like every opportunity I've had in my professional life has been because somebody took a chance on me and believed in me, maybe even when I didn't believe in myself. And in this case, it was taking a chance on someone I was dating and seeing where that led us professionally. And then also all these clients who put their faith in us. We were completely untested. We were young. We had a very small book of business. We didn't have that much experience, and yet all of these clients, everyone from Alexander Wang to, which I know like problematic, but at the time a cool brand, to Soho House and a couple young startups in New York. Like all of these companies took a chance on us, especially, kind of given how inexperienced we were. And we learned a lot by doing, and it kind of references back to this, like the earliest part of my career where I was trying to figure out who I was online, and sort of like became this like sort of like autodidact. And we, Streeter, my husband, and I kind of like taught ourselves a lot about business, made a lot of mistakes, fell on our butts a couple of times, but we, ultimately we built something that we were really proud of. And it was a really formative experience in my professional life. And we still work together, but we don't have studio anymore. He ended up getting a dream job in film, and I ended up moving into a couple different new areas, including finding my way back to film, it's funny how when you're a child, like I had grown up with two parents who were filmmakers, and I always thought to myself, like, it's really great they do that, but I don't want that to be my career. I want to find my own way, find my own creative path, find my own creative journey. And then kind of in a funny turn of events in the way life will take you different directions you wouldn't expect, I ended up working for a production company with this team, Max and Andre, here in New York. And the work that they did was it's a lot of music videos, a lot of fashion films. It was, it's all film. And Andre is a very talented director. Max, his then EP, had this like really interesting background in both documentary and commercial filmmaking. And I sort of just jumped into this experience of working in film, having done a little bit here and there while working on the Everything and at Matt, but had much more sort of like this background as a writer and a storyteller. And I was surprised by how those skills just transpose really beautifully onto then writing scripts and writing treatments and then spending a lot more time on set. And I moved from being someone who was more behind the scenes, working kind of more on screens, to then spending a lot of time on set, spending a lot of time developing ideas creatively in the real world and building spaces that are inhabited by talent and by by film crews. And it became this like sort of this experience of taking things that like ordinarily live on either a 2D surface or on a screen and then bringing them to life in 3D and Technicolor with film. And it was an incredibly beautiful experience. And it's kind of just interesting how the journey will take you places where you wouldn't expect. And then that takes me to today. So even though I've been working as an independent creative for pretty much the majority of my career, in addition to also having a 9-to-5, after leaving a full-time role with Andre Bateau, I've now just sort of leaned in fully to working as an independent creative, but I do have the benefit of always working with teams. So my clients today are either agencies or brands and companies where I have the opportunity to embed myself fully with their in-house teams. And for me, that's sort of the reason why I love what I do. So even though I'm an independent creative, it's not about me, it's about working with these incredible individuals, these in-house teams or these small agencies and shops to realize these big creative ideas. And it's about this kind of collective coming together to realize these very ambitious creative projects. And I really don't believe it's possible to be a creative without having a team and feeling like you're part of something larger than yourself. And for me, ultimately, at the end of the day with my career, it's just like the most important part of what I do. And it's really what drives me and it's what I love the most. So even though the power of independence comes from being able to choose the projects I want to work on and work with clients I'm excited by, not just sort of being fed work at an agency or at a production company, the freedom to also collaborate with people I really love and am excited by or really admire, ultimately at the end of the day is really the best thing about the work that I do. And I've been incredibly fortunate over the years to work on some very exciting campaigns and projects that have been just at the end, at the end of the day, like dreams for me. I never would have imagined that I'd get to work with a company like Neiman Marcus or Nike. And I'd actually said to myself early in my career that like Nike for me was like that client where I was like, oh, like the day that I get to work with Nike will be the day that I made it. And so it's incredibly cool to look back and be like, not only have I worked with Nike, but I've worked with Nike very consistently over the years and had the opportunity to build a great relationship with their team and work on some big campaigns with them. So it's kind of cool to see your dreams come to life like that. And, working across film and photo and creative strategy and branding and music and fashion and culture and art and design, it's very cool. And for me, it's been this kind of like amazing confluence of all the things that I didn't even know that I was developing and honing as this like nerdy kid on the internet to now being able to take those skills and take the things I've learned and the mistakes I've made, like the happy accidents and the creative projects, and all these things that just felt like play and turn that play into a career. And I just feel incredibly fortunate that I'm able to do this. I just wanted to share a couple projects I've worked on. So this was a really fun campaign that I got to work on with Nike with their team in New York, the women's fashion team. So Nike is a massive global brand. They have many different divisions, and they kind of appear at like every major cultural moment. Nike has a presence, and New York Fashion Week has historically been this moment for Nike to either throw a big event or a fashion show or bring people together in a physical space. A couple of years ago, the team in New York wanted to do something around New York Fashion Week that didn't involve an event that only a handful of people got to attend or a couple of VIPs got to experience. Is this idea of creating almost like a New York Fashion Week show on the streets. And so we created this really fun film. We worked with an amazing cast, an incredible director, photographer, Emmy America, and we got to shoot around my neighborhood, which was very fun. This bodega actually that you see here in the film is my local bodega, Sunny and Annie's in Alphabet City. Shout out. It was an incredibly exciting project, and it was fun to work with Nike in a way that felt like different to the way they typically work. We got to work with some amazing talent, and the project lived worldwide, nationwide, and it was just very cool. It was the first time in my career that I kind of literally saw my work on the big screen, and it was both extremely exciting, gratifying, and very humbling to be able to like go to Times Square and see something that I'd worked on for several months come to life on these big jumbotrons, and people share the work in that way. And got to work with some incredible women who were the stars of the campaign. And as a creative director, I got to work on the casting and the script and the concept and really developed the campaign from end to end, and being able to work with a great collaborator like Emmy, the photographer director, and help realize these creative visions, like sort of take the creative work out of the deck and put it into the real world was incredibly fun. And honestly, getting to work with talented creatives like Emmy is one of the favorite parts of my job. And then Neiman Marcus. So Neiman Marcus is this legendary American department store based in Dallas, and they've kind of gone through several changes. Even recently, I think that Neiman Marcus has sort of like been going through this evolution. But at the time that I worked with them with an agency called Chandelier Creative, we had the opportunity to reimagine this incredible document called the book. The book was this catalog that was a physical document that would arrive by mail, and it was sort of this catalog of dreams that always came out around the holidays. And it wasn't just fashion; it was the most sort of fabulous, extravagant, rare, and unusual gifts, things that there's only one of in the world, or something so ridiculously over the top that it would be like special commissioned just for the purchaser. And working on this project really reminded me of my experience as a kid on the internet, sort of like looking at these beautiful things from afar, sort of dreaming about what it would be like to inhabit that world where that thing would be part of your home or your life, or you get to wear this amazing designer clothing or have these objects in your home. And kind of tapping back into this like world of fantasy and possibility was where this campaign came from. And I'm sharing this because I think it's important to show how campaigns come together in several different ways, but in the case of this particular body of work, the gestation of the creative concept came from the manifesto. So I wrote this manifesto. I worked with Chandelier's in-house creative team. We sort of brought it to life visually, but the creative campaign concept, everything from the name of the campaign to like the big idea, came from this manifesto. And it was this anthem for the new vision for what Neiman Marcus could become and the spirit of where they came from. And it's a celebration of Texas, which is, Dallas, Texas is where Neiman Marcus was born, but like tapping into this world of possibility and fantasy that just feels so core to like the possibilities imbued within fashion and within creative spaces. So taking this manifesto, developed the name of the campaign and the larger kind of like creative container wrapper for the book, and they came to life both in retail and then with the physical document, which went out in the mail, which is like this beautiful bound book. It's like really a magazine that had editorials and these kind of gorgeous spreads photographed by photographers from all over the country, and had all these interesting creative contributors who all came together to create this tome that celebrated this vision for what Neiman Marcus could become, and was a nod back to the roots of the brand as well as sort of a reimagining for the future. And then, so in addition to the kind of like one-off project-based work that I've done as a independent creative, I had the opportunity, and I've had the opportunity a couple of times, but I recently had the opportunity to join a young brand as a fractional creative director. And what that means is like, you're not a full-time member of their team, but you're brought in at a very early stage as a fractional creative director. So you're sort of temporarily there to help build the brand, get it off the ground, implement these creative structures, build a framework, build a team, and sort of pass the baby back to the founders to then carry on themselves. And so I joined this fashion startup called Otherling, which actually just launched, and really helped them. When I joined the team, there was like kind of like a sketch of an idea on the table, but nothing had been built, nothing had been fully realized, and helped them take this seedling of an idea and create a brand from the inside out. And that came to life from everything from the visual identity to the website to all the collateral we created around the launch of the brand, shooting the launch campaign, and beginning to develop a point of view where we began to ask ourselves as a team, and I had the opportunity to really interrogate the founder, like, what is it that we're trying to build? Why are we trying to do this? Like, what kind of story do we want to tell? If we're writing this character, like, who is Otherling? How do we show up in the world? And as we developed creative strategy, it was like not just about who is our, what is the product market fit, who's our customer, but it's like, why does the world need this thing? And is it important that we bring it? Is it important we bring it to life? And so having the opportunity to work very closely with the founder and build something like this platform from the ground up taught me a lot about what it means to also build something and be part of something and be a founder, and how difficult that is, and how it really is kind of like giving birth to this new entity, this like new person. I have an immense amount of respect for founders because I personally am not cut out for like just taking, building something so big and carrying it forward for years and years. So it was a really good reminder just how hard it is to build something and how powerful it is when you eventually then launch into the world and see someone respond to it and have an audience and people who love what you've built and respond to it very positively. So it was a beautiful experience. And in working as a fractional CD on Otherling, it was cool to take all of these different disparate creative disciplines and bring them to life for all of these various touch points. So with a launch film, launch campaign with like stills and video, printed collateral, visual identity, brand narrative, brand strategy, all these things that I've worked on throughout my career, being able to do that sort of end-to-end for a new company from the inside, as opposed to just doing it as a single project and then delivering to the company to sort of do with it what they will, was really cool. Okay, so I've reached the end of my presentation, but I wanted to sort of kind of quickly rehash like this like very long meandering journey that I feel like my career has taken, and maybe it can be helpful for your audience, or maybe help answer any questions that your audience might have about like, what does it take to become a creative director, and like, what does it take to do the kind of work that we do? But my career began by accident, and I had these like self-taught design skills. It was really about a means to an end. Didn't realize that I was using those to further a career. I didn't have a bigger plan. It wasn't someone who like sat around and sort of like mapped out my life and said like, okay, I'm going to teach myself design because I want to work in branding and advertising. I just like had these skills I acquired and sort of parlayed them into something bigger. But at the time, it was like having fun and really leaning into play. And I think that was so important, having the opportunity to create with no end goal in mind, and the freedom and opportunity to just like let myself play and make mistakes was really raw and incredibly important. And, I love to read, I loved to write, and in spending time blogging and connecting with people on Tumblr, I was building community, and it was more than a hobby. It was a way that I sort of like initially laying the groundwork for quote creating a network and beginning to build a creative community even before I understood what that really was. And having this shared interest, this obsession with fashion, youth culture, gave me a way to connect with others. And because I was unafraid of cringe, and I was too young to really feel embarrassed or understand that like maybe like having a blog is sort of dorky, I was able to create a platform for myself where not only was I connecting with people sort of in a private sphere, I was able to develop and share and hone and sharpen my own taste and feel what that felt like when people responded to that work, and then kind of connected with it and being able to create conversations around it. And again, like at the time, I didn't realize how pivotal that would be for building up a sense of confidence in my own taste and my own eye, and being able to further that and then do that for clients, and to feel confident to bring work into the world for others. But having that as a foundation was incredibly important. And always having these little side projects. So like, yes, I was a student, and yes, I had internships, but always having these sort of like 5 to 9 side projects, things that happened in the margins or at night or early in the morning, again, really helped me develop taste, point of view, and develop a work ethic. And it, I said this before, but I think it's really important. Like if you follow your interests and your passions, like a career will come after that. You'll find yourself, or kind of fall into where you're meant to land if you follow your passions and follow your interests and don't ignore those impulses. But all of that meant nothing until I found community and mentorship and met people like Molly Young at Warby, or Andy and Anthony at Partners in Spade, people who are older than me, people who had immense career expertise, people who, had experience and had lived the things that I was hoping to do, and who could help guide me and offer me advice and took me under their wing. And I owe all of these people and all of these opportunities everything, because without them, I would never have been able to have the career that I've had or the opportunities that I've had. People took a chance on me and they believed in me even before I could believe in myself. But part of that at the end of the day is always just taking a risk on yourself and saying yes to everything. Not being afraid to try things that are maybe a little bit beyond your pay grade or a little bit beyond your expertise, saying yes to things that felt like they were taking me somewhere I hadn't been before, but being excited for the journey as well as for the process of getting there. And invariably you try things and maybe you fail, or you work on a project and it's a flop, or you have a difficult client, or you work with someone who is not the creative collaborator you hope that they would be. But all of that is incredibly formative. And I think everyone needs to have those experiences in their career to understand where they want to be, how they want to work, who they want to work with. I think failure is really important, and the fear of failure will only hold you back. It's never going to be you. If you never try, you'll never know. And at the end of the day, giving everything a shot, every possible opportunity a shot, is incredibly important. But for me in my career, speaking as Olivia, collaboration is everything. And it's really not just about like you and your experiences, it's about the people you get to do this kind of work with. And it's kind of why I do what I do. Is I love the people I get to work with. I love my clients. I love my creative collaborators. I love the community that I have had the opportunity to meet. And it's really about the people. It's about collaboration. It's about being able to do these crazy things together. So thank you. Thanks for letting me talk about the meandering journey of my career and all these like kind of wacky things that led me here to where I am today.
Thank you. It's kind of weird speaking for a long period of time without seeing the other person, right?
Yeah, I was like, whew, are you still here?
I am still here, but I'm glad I was on mute because I was scribbling lots of questions down as we went through. If you can unshare the screen, and then at least we can see each other again.
Let's do it.
Awesome. I'm still here.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to me talk at you.
No, not at all. It's beautiful. I knew that you had an impressive body of work. I'd never had the opportunity to see it in that format before. I think the interesting thing is often I come across and I connect with creatives through the body of work. So you'll see something they do that tends to inform or start a conversation, but actually having the opportunity to see what informed it, you selling sunglasses at 10 years old, it starts to give a little bit of an understanding of the person behind the career. And I really kind of appreciate that. I have to say, one, of course, it's beautiful to see all the work, but then simplifying it down into that kind of meandering chart is such an amazing thing that I think a lot of the time we forget when we're going through this journey of how many people are going through very, very similar kind of junctions as you are. And like, unafraid of cringe is so visceral. Like the idea of putting yourself out there, and especially when you're starting out in your career, this fear of always wanting to have everything that's absolutely perfect before you actually put that out into the world. So there's so much that I take from there, and everything that you say, actually. I think it was a beautiful talk, so I really appreciate you doing that. Have you got time for us to go through just a couple of questions?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I did a lot of talking, but yes, I
No,
do.
not at all. Never apologize. I think just based on the direction and just how much you shared about your career, there's a few things that I'd love to ask. Like you've been from the way in which you speak about some of the people that you've met on your journey, mentorship was such a key part for you. The fact that you speak about how pivotal and crucial these people have been in the evolution and development of you as a creative and what that's enabled you to go on to achieve. Is there any advice you'd ever have for anybody who potentially is seeking a mentor outside of their own workplace? Because you've had these great people that have existed within there, but have you ever looked to seek mentorship outside of a work environment? And what would be some advice, or what were the things or characteristics that you look for within these individuals that you think would be great for a mentor? Because I imagine a lot of younger designers, especially those who are going through education right now, that actually the world's changed so much that there's less of an opportunity to get those great kind of like mentors within kind of like a collaborative work environment, since the whole world has changed and there's so much more work from home. So what are the kind of those characteristics or those behaviors that were demonstrated that actually changed them from being just colleagues into people that you really admire and respect? That's my phone ringing.
Okay, my dog has been snoring, so hopefully you haven't heard that either.
Okay.
Well, I have kind of two pieces of advice. One is that I was completely unashamed about just cold emailing people. And I know that sounds like, I'm sure people have said that before to your audience, but I don't think one should ever be scared to reach out to people you admire and shoot your shot, because even if it's an Instagram DM or just like an email into the ether, I certainly get a lot of inbound from young creatives who are curious about my career or how I got where I am. And I always make the effort if I can to just, I can't always hop on the phone, but like I always try to make the effort to reply. And I know that that's probably the case for you too. So if you are early in your career, if you're a student or you're just figuring out where you want to be and you're looking for mentorship, don't be afraid to just cold call someone whose work you really admire or someone whose voice you really resonate with. I've been very lucky that the people who have been mentors in my life are people who I've met through job opportunities that I was already kind of like within the ecosystem of. But the other thing that I didn't mention, which I think is kind of important, is like the way that like the internet is the asylum that raised me, and the people that I met on sort of like the people I met on Tumblr are now people that I'm like close to on Instagram, and like people I've met online have become clients and collaborators and people who are also just sort of peers. We share our life experiences and creative, sort of like, people ask me all the time about pricing, and like these are people I've never met in person or worked with, but we have this sort of shared creative community. And I think that that's also really important. Where mentorship, obviously having older people or people who are further along in their career, like having that kind of hand to hold is really pivotal if you can find it, but also finding peers who you can share your career experience with, I think is also really important.
Yeah, I've never really thought about it in that way. I think even just to the dynamic of how I met you,
Totally.
And the majority of the relationship that we've started to establish has primarily been through a mutual admiration of craft, and that's in some way kept us in an ability to have some form of kind of sustained relationship. And obviously that led to me wanting to have you to here today, because I've got such a huge admiration for the work that you do, even though I didn't have a huge kind of like understanding of the background that you had. I had no idea of how many different businesses you'd been in, and the fact that you'd started your own practice to then go independent. So I'd love to ask another question. Just I only got two, and then we can kind of call it a day. I know you're in the middle of your work day. Obviously, with work from home now being such a prevalent part, and I know you're in an incredible building in New York, but when you were in your days at Matt and you were speaking about the fact that that was where you met your partner and your husband, and you kind of, I don't remember how you said it, like sex, drugs, rock and roll, like the partying and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, the work environment has changed so much since back then. And I think especially for younger designers, they have less of an ability to kind of exist within the ecosystem of like a traditional studio space. Like the days have gone where everybody was in the studio every day. You kind of lived and died by the sword. You had everyone in one space lifting the energy. There was all of the great stuff that happened between the work. But But you mentioned a lot about how Matt was such a great team and culture. And like for you personally, what do you think you looked for that made Matt feel as though it stood out so significantly? What was that thing that made them such a great team? What is the thing that for you, if you said that you don't want to build a big company with lots of people, but if you were to establish your own practice again, what do you think determines a great culture? So I'm just really interested of why that in particular, albeit you had so many positive things to say about the great companies that you worked for. What was it about that specifically that constituted towards that feeling of a great team and that cultural impact that it's left on you?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And, I think a lot of people who worked at Matt would agree that it was not like the easiest place to work because we were all very young and we were all figuring it out together. But it was that element that made it so great because there was no sort of like, elder, graybeard, like long in the tooth. I've been in the industry, like old battle axe. No one had any idea what they were doing. And at times it made it a very difficult place to work, but other times it was very like beautiful and inspiring. And like, we were all kind of aware that what we were doing was like, maybe like the least direct route between A and B, but the journey to get there was fun and interesting and engaging. And I think that there was a lot to be said for like time of life. Like I was 23, 24, 25. I didn't know any better. Had I been older, I think I would have really chafed against that experience. So because it was so informal, so kind of wild, so like such a real roller coaster. But when you're so young, and first of all, you're unformed, you're sort of just like big old blob of clay and you don't know any better. You don't have any bad habits or like other people's bad habits become your own. And you're willing to take a chance on something that would otherwise be a risk. Like, I had nothing to hold me back from taking a risk on a young company and for them to take a risk on me because we were all so young and so early in our careers. To your question about what it means to be a young person entering the workplace today and not having that kind of very in-person, very spontaneous, very sort of wild experience, I don't know how you create that without being able to work in person, but I do think that being adventurous, being curious, and getting offline is really important. It's important for all of us that spending time not behind a computer screen, getting out in the world, meeting people. I'm not saying like you need to go to a bar, but I'm saying like go to a museum, go to a gallery, spend time outside, go to a park, meet people, talk to people. Spontaneous connection, I think, is so important. And I met some of my best friends at Matt, but I've also met some of my best friends just like out and about and just being in the world. And those people then have become not just friends, but also collaborators and clients and people who've introduced me to clients and people who have shared worldviews and perspectives that have changed my mind and opened my eyes to things I would never have experienced myself. So I think it's really important as you're building your career, but especially when you're young, to get offline and be with people. So even if you're not being with people in the office, being with people in life is so important.
I couldn't agree more. It's to me, it's probably one of the most important skills that I've developed. It kind of falls a little bit in line of the unafraid of cringe.
Totally.
The idea of reaching out to people, not really worrying about the fear of rejection. I think for me, one of the things as I've got older is being unafraid of the kind of the repercussions or the what would you even call it, the fear of rejection, in the sense that I regularly put myself in very uncomfortable positions to start up conversations with people who I'm just really interested to learn more about. And the worst that could possibly happen is someone say, this is just not the conversation for me. But ultimately, the more that you show genuine interest in someone, the more you end up having conversations that are really rich and beautiful, that lead to really kind of long and established relationships. I'm going to ask you one last question, and then I'll let you go. There's one really important part, or one very, it's small in terms of the scale of a presentation, but for me, it's actually a really important skill. And you wrote saying yes to everything. Now, looking back, but also now looking forwards, there's a lot of things that are kind of have become norms or things that I feel are slightly broken or outdated within the industry. There's a lot of things around pitching and unfair treatment of creatives and underfunding and underrepresentation. So I'll ask one last question, which is saying yes to things is hugely important. But what are the things that you think are the line of when you should say no? So if you were to look back and say, okay, well, Olivia, 21, starting out her career, what are the things that from your journey, without saying I have regrets, do you think are important things for people to learn and hold firm on, that feel as though they kind of honor self-respect and they feel as though they are things that are comfortable to say no to?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a really good question and something I ask myself a lot. And I've actually, while I said yes to everything when I was early in my career, I've become much more selective. And I've actually realized that I can only do a couple of things well at once. So I can really only handle like maybe 2, maybe 3 projects at a time. So bandwidth for me is one of the things where I'm like being very honest with yourself about what your capabilities are. Like truly like what kind of time can you devote to a project. But there's also just being really clear with yourself about like morally, spiritually, what you are willing to work on. For example, I had kind of earlier in my career, I did a project with a diamond company. And at the time when I took the job, it didn't resonate, it didn't register for me that it was a very dirty industry. And then the more I learned about the business, it's obviously, I won't name names, but it was like one of the most legendary diamond companies in the world, luxury brand that everyone knows. I became increasingly uncomfortable with the work. And I think all of us on the team did. And for me, it was a good reminder that you have to kind of work with integrity and work with clients whose values align with your own. And asking yourself those questions up front, I think is really valuable. And in that moment, I didn't even really sort of think to ask myself those questions. But as I've become a little bit more mature in my career and I have more clarity on what it is that I want to work on, who it is I want to work with, being clear about the kind of businesses, the kind of products, the kind of approaches to business, how people are treated that you either align with or you don't resonate with, I think is also really critical. But sometimes you take on a project and you don't know until you're in it. And it's a good reminder that sometimes you take a risk on something and it just is a total flop.
I think it's a beautiful place to finish, because I think there's so much you can take from that answer and the conversation we've just had, that the answers are almost transferable within them, such as company culture, being really aligned with people's value set, and often that kind of interrogation, the power to say no, kind of remaining true to the principles that you have, serve you really, really well, not just commercially, but also building sustainable and like long sustained relationships, both in friendship and commercial instances. And I think it's a really beautiful answer. It's something that I massively align with as well. And it does, at times it feels uncomfortable because you feel as though you're saying no to an opportunity that may be really important to you financially, but in the mid and long term, it ends up becoming something that ends up defining you as an individual, but also your practice. So fully aligned with that. Listen, all I have to say is I just massively appreciate your time. I always appreciate everybody who takes the time to speak on this channel, especially given that I think as an industry challenge, there's a lot of paywalls behind being able to hear from inspirational people, and also shining the light on people that don't really get the opportunity to be on the stage when they really deserve to. I think your story's beautiful. I think you're an amazing person. I've always said that ever since we met. I love your dog, especially. But yeah, I think I've taken such a huge amount from this, and I generally think that a lot of people will also feel the same way. As an inspirational female creative, I'm a massive not just even follower, just massive respect for everything that you do and everything that you'll continue to do. So on behalf of Times Elliott, but also everyone who will get the chance to watch this when anyone watches this, it will almost appear as live, but it's 2 weeks from today that we were recording it. But massive, massive thank you for me, and thank you for taking the time.
No, thank you. And I mean, like I said in the presentation, like every opportunity I've had is because someone took a risk on me and invited me into their inner circle. So thank you so much for including me in yours. And I think the last thing I'll say is that it's really hard to break into the industry. So if any of your audience members ever want to DM me or email me, they're welcome to reach out. I'm always happy to answer any questions that they have.
I know that's honest as well.
No, I really mean it. I think it's so important to just don't be scared of cringe, just reach out.